I did something. It was probably in somebody's analysis a scandalous thing to do. I watched this documentary once. It was about this group called the Young Lords. They'd started in Chicago. It was in mostly black and white. Among the things it talked about were that one of the first things it did, this organization, is it went through the neighborhoods and it started these community trash pickup groups. There was a trash strike, there was a strike of sanitation workers in the city. There was haggling over the contracting, and there was discrimination. So it wasn't as if many people from the Puerto Rican community in Chicago were able to have the kinds of jobs that were being negotiated. But the trash was mounting up. So they created these community based trash pickup entities. They went around the community and cleaned up trash, and this was a way that they understood and identified their role in the community, and it brought esteem and respect to them. There was also these school programs that they did for food to get food to the students and the children in the school. These were some of the things they started when they began their political organizing. And over the years, things changed. I bring this up because I just found something very disturbing to me. And it's similar to what happened with the story regarding the young lords. That I was in a bookstore and I found a book on the a Jewish history of the United States that go all the way back. This book had a variety of different time frames around Jewish history, but this one went specifically back to the areas I was looking at in this book to the beginning of the first Jewish migration to the United States and what different aspects of the early colonial Jewish communities did. And it's absolutely fascinating, and I didn't know most of it. I didn't know most of it. I didn't know most of it, and I found out that some of the named references that been associated with in my life had a name reference that had a different relationship in the colonial period and in other early parts of American history than maybe those family names, especially the ones I've encountered, have now. And I bring this up because when I was in Chicago originally, it was anathema to discuss my feelings about growing up in a military environment, how complicated it was for a variety of political reasons, and it didn't seem relevant. I never identified anybody with whom I was in community until probably when I went to San Francisco as having a real connection to the military in a way that felt like the community I was in. We were critical of the military. We were working toward the balance of understanding militancy versus militarization. We had our own relationship with the variety of understandings of how the military intersected with the surveillance state and the role it had in international struggles. Um, and so it was not something that would seem like my community. But when I went to San Francisco, one of the first things I did is I started volunteering at a food distribution down the street from where I lived. And except for me, everybody else that volunteered was a military veteran. And so while I was with them and I was volunteering there, because honestly, I wanted to get to know people, and I was going through my own situation with adjusting. That while I was there, I got to know these people, all kinds of different people who were veterans, different racial backgrounds, different places around the country. And I will tell you that the vibrations were very significant. There was a lot going on, but everybody I met, I understood and believed was honest. And they were good people, even if they were going through a challenging experience. And it was something that made me happy to get to know them the way I did. As a matter of fact, there was a particular kind of ceremony that they went through this. Some of them were in a program, and as part of this program, there were graduations. And one of them invited me to accompany him and the people he was with to the ceremony for his graduation. And it was a very profound experience for me. And it's one that really changed my understanding of what it means to consider what being in community has the possibility to be. So, after that happened, things started to happen on when politics started to change during the Obama administration, by the way. I had this experience when I returned to Chicago, and my reference points were all different. In the community I had talked to or knew before just was not accessible. Nobody I saw when I returned to Chicago after being gone for over 5 years was available to meet with me again. And things had changed. Things had changed a lot. But one day I went to a museum in a neighborhood that was a Mexican American neighborhood, a very well established Mexican American neighborhood. And while I'm walking through the museum, I see a picture on the wall, and it is discussing the fact that, as it represented, that during and after World War II, there were more Congressional Medal of Honor winners who were of Hispanic descent or who were Mexican American than any other ethnic group in terms of representation of winners of the Congressional Medal of Honor. And it was a very dissonance, it was a very disturbing kind of moment for me. Nobody had ever told me that. Nobody ever told me that. Nobody ever told me about the early military before Jim Crow. Nobody ever told me about that. Not while I was growing up, and not in more than a decade's worth of racial justice organizing. Nobody wants to talk about A. Philip Randolph and what he actually did. And nobody wants to talk about the freedom budget and what they did instead. And this is a very deep and profound pain, and a very deep and profound hurt, because it seems to have correlated with other things that make little to no sense. And that's why I'm so hurt right now. In this book was an acknowledgement of an event that happened where two rabbis ended up having a very public dispute about slavery. In 1861, in January of 1861, there's a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Raphael from New York who was asked, I suppose, his thoughts on slavery, and he wrote a sermon about slavery from a perspective of supporting slavery. Now, in the book I read, it's an older book I read, it discussed his who he wrote it for, how he wrote it, discussed the time frame, and then it said that another rabbi, a Rabbi Michael Halprin, wrote a response. It gives the name of the article, the date of the response, and the publication it was written in. It talks about other things that were happening about the abolitionist tradition, as well as the fact that there were a number of American Jews who were also pro-Confederate. Well, I wanted to see if I could find it online. I found a webpage online, and I read through what they said was the recounting on the webpage of slavery and the Hebrew scriptures, a reply to the Rabbi Raphael by Rabbi Michael Halprin. I read it, and there was something about the attenuation. It didn't seem correct, but as if there was a shielding, is how I understood it. It's like a shielding, because you could tell, you could anticipate, and the way he wrote, there was a lot of conviction. This was not genteel language. I looked, and I was like, oh, well, the date here is different than the date in the book. So it linked to the original sermon by Rabbi Raphael, and lo and behold, they'd swapped the dates. They've swapped out the pro-slavery sermon and the anti-slavery sermon by the rabbis. That's what's on the site right now. Who had the authority to do that? Who thought it was appropriate to swap out completely contrasting interpretations of the Hebrew scriptures that were published in the United States that made specific references and interpretive explications? Who fucking thought it was okay to put online and misrepresent currently, right now, that one rabbi wrote the opposite and the other rabbi wrote the opposite, that one came first and the other came later, when it's actually intentionally, strategically, right now, aimed at sabotaging the authentic text? Who does these things? This isn't Russian hacking. This isn't China. Who does this? Who is constantly doing these things? The whole point is to make it look like they converted. That's the disgusting thing. That's the fucking underwriting. Was it actually Jewish people? Or was it Christians that are trying to do this ceremonial thing that I've been seeing for fucking years, where they convert the Jews to Christianity and usually accuse the Jews of some sin for which they must confess? I swear to, that's how it reads now, because they swapped the dates out.